They said the Bennett house was built with stone quarried from the earth behind it. Cold grey limestone veined with something darker, almost red, like the earth bled when they dug too deep. The house stood at the end of Bellwood Road, silent and motionless, as if even the wind avoided brushing against its shutters. To those who passed by, it was just another relic of a bygone century. Tall chimneys, wrap-around porch, and curtains that never moved. But in every town, there are stories too strange to be inventions, and in Lancaster County, few stories were whispered more often or more fearfully than the one about the Bennett family. No one really remembered when the rumors began. Some said the family kept to themselves because of tragedy. Others claimed the old man, Elijah Bennett, was hiding something beneath that dignified posture and surgical calm. But no matter the speculation, all agreed on one thing. There was something wrong with the house. Children dared each other to run across the lawn, but none ever reached the porch. Dogs wouldn't go near the fence. And if a traveller took a wrong turn and found themselves on Bellwood Road at night, they'd double back without understanding why their hands were shaking. Martha Green remembered the first time she visited the Bennett estate. It was spring of 1901, 2 years before the end. She'd been invited as a tutor for little Abigail Bennett. Martha was in her late 20s then, unmarried, principled, and determined to build a reputation as an educator. She didn't believe in gossip or ghost stories, at least not then. The invitation came in elegant cursive, pressed into thick paper with a faint scent of lavender and something sharper beneath. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, dressed in grey wool and carrying a satchel of books. The house was colder inside than it had any right to be. Marble floors clicked beneath her heels, and the butler, a thin man named Cyrus, led her down a narrow hall toward the parlour. It was there she first met the Bennett children. Judith, the eldest, barely acknowledged her. 16 and poised, she sat at the piano, hands motionless on the keys, eyes not meeting Martha's. Henry, 12, looked up from a leather-bound journal, his pupils too large for the dim light. Abigail, 8, ran toward her with something between delight and desperation, clutching Martha's skirt and whispering, "You smell like the church." Martha laughed gently, unsettled but hiding it. "That's because I walked past St. Gabriel's on the way here," she replied. Abigail blinked. "No." "You smell like prayer." It should have ended there, just an odd comment from a strange child. But that night Martha dreamt of organ music and bones wrapped in silk. Still, she returned the next day, and the next. The pay was generous, the family polite, and she felt something fragile in Abigail, something worth protecting. Yet even in those early visits, the unease grew. Rooms shifted their shapes in her memory. Doors changed positions. A small silver crucifix she wore beneath her collar once burned her skin after she entered the library. She told herself it was her imagination, stress, overwork. But in town, the silence around the Bennetts deepened. Neighbours crossed streets to avoid their path in the market. Ministers hesitated when asked about the family. "They're private," was all they'd say. "Respect their privacy." Only old Mrs. Hollister, the apothecary's wife, spoke plainly. "Elijah's not the man he once was," she said, pouring a vial of valerian root into Martha's hands. "And that house? Well, some places forget how to be homes, child. They become other things. If you're still with me and these stories of forgotten homes and hidden darkness intrigue you, subscribe to the channel. There's more than you can imagine, buried beneath polite smiles and quiet streets." Back on Bellwood Road, time passed strangely. Martha noticed that the clocks in the Bennett house never quite matched hers. A minute ahead here, a second behind there, but never in sync. The children, especially Abigail, spoke in riddles. "Mr. Crow likes you," she said once, peering out the window. "He says you don't smell like meat." "Who is Mr. Crow?" Martha asked. Abigail's expression shifted. "He's my friend. But Judith doesn't like him. She says he's part of the other." That night Martha stood in her boarding room and turned the name over in her mind. The other. The phrase felt wrong in her mouth, like biting into a fruit and finding it full of rot. She began to take notes, recording the strange behavior, the whispers, the cold spots in the hallway, and the growing feeling that the children weren't just odd, They were being watched, not by parents or staff, but by something they never mentioned directly, something they feared. On her 6th visit, she found a feather on her chair in the study, black, oily, and curved like a sickle. She never saw a bird. Elijah Bennett did not smile. That was the first thing most people remembered about him, not his fine suits, nor his polished boots, nor the sharp silver streaks in his beard. It was the absence of warmth. Even in the polite nods he gave at Sunday services, even in the firm grip of his handshake, there was a hollowness, like his presence moved through the world without ever touching it. Born in 1851, Elijah had built his reputation as a skilled physician during the latter years of the Civil War. He served on the Union side, tending to broken limbs, fevered bodies, and the mangled wreckage left behind after battle. But unlike other doctors who returned shattered by what they'd seen, Elijah came back quieter, more focused. He settled in Pennsylvania in 1876, bought land on Bellwood Road, and opened a private clinic on the edge of town. People admired him. He was calm in emergencies, precise with a scalpel, generous with his time, but the admiration was always tempered by a certain caution, because while Elijah saved lives, he never mourned the ones he lost. And when patients began to vanish under his care, first a drifter, then a girl from the next township, rumors stirred. Officially, the clinic closed in 1884 after a fire consumed part of the West Wing. No one was harmed, and Elijah paid for the repairs out of pocket. But the clinic never reopened. The building was absorbed into his home, and from that point on, Elijah withdrew. He no longer attended town meetings. He stopped taking patients. He focused on his family and his estate, hiring staff who didn't ask questions and rarely stayed long. Martha only met Elijah twice during her first month as Abigail's tutor. The first time was brief. He passed through the study while she was reviewing arithmetic. He paused, glanced at the paper, then turned to Abigail and said, "Add them in your head." "The hand is slower than the mind." His voice was low and dry, like parchment rubbed against stone. The second meeting was more deliberate. Martha had requested time to speak about Abigail's sleep disruptions. The girl often fell into trances, whispered to unseen figures, and once began drawing symbols in chalk on the floor. Martha believed it could be addressed through careful supervision. Elijah listened without interruption. His study was dark, books stacked high, a single oil lamp burning behind him. A framed photo of his wedding sat on the desk, but the glass was cracked, the faces inside dimmed by age. "I appreciate your concern," he said after a long pause. "Children invent shadows to explain the things they feel but can't yet name." Martha nodded slowly. "Still, I think she needs structure, perhaps more time outdoors." "Sunlight won't cure what is inside her," he replied. That phrase stayed with her. Not what troubles her, not what disturbs her, but what is inside her. She asked if he'd considered consulting another physician. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. He simply folded his hands and said, "There are things in this world that physicians cannot cut out." The conversation ended there. He stood, signaling it was time to leave. As Martha exited, she noticed the books lining the wall behind him bore no titles on their spines. All were bound in deep green leather, identical and unnervingly still, like animals playing dead. Outside the study, the hallway stretched longer than she remembered. She mentioned her unease to Cyrus, the butler, during one of the afternoon teas he served in the Rose Parlor. Cyrus never looked her in the eye. "The master is a private man," he said. "He has seen more than most." "Seen what?" Martha asked. The tray in his hands trembled slightly. "War. Loss. Truth." In town, she began asking questions more subtly. The librarian, Miss Rawlings, recalled that Elijah had once requested books on ancient anatomy and medieval medicine. "He was very thorough," she said he was tracing old surgical practices. But one of the texts he ordered, it wasn't in English. And it was banned in parts of Europe. Others remembered the disappearances, patients who entered the clinic and never came back. "Transient folk, mostly," muttered Mr. Hargrove, the blacksmith. "People no one cared to chase after." "But that was decades ago," his wife chimed in, trying to end the conversation. "Dr. Bennett's just a recluse now." harmless. Yet beneath every attempt to explain, there was the same thin layer of fear. Not panic, not accusation, just a quiet understanding that Elijah Bennett was not a man to question too deeply. Back at the estate, Martha began to notice things in Abigail's lessons. Drawings of cages beneath trees, stick figures with their eyes scratched out. Once Abigail drew a man with a crow's head standing behind her father. When asked who it was, she replied softly, "That's who tells him how to heal." Martha laughed, though the sound felt brittle. "And who tells him how to hurt?" Abigail didn't answer. That night, the old clock in the guest room stopped at 3:17 a.m. She awoke cold, her breath fogging in the air, and heard the distant creak of a door opening somewhere in the house. Evelyn Bennett never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She moved through her home like a whisper, seen more than heard, gliding from room to room with such grace that the air itself seemed reluctant to follow. Tall, poised, always dressed in silks that rustled like dry leaves, Evelyn was the kind of woman who made people lower their eyes without understanding why. Her presence wasn't commanding, it was chilling, like walking into a room that had been empty for too long. Martha first met her properly 3 weeks after beginning her tutoring. So until then, Evelyn had remained out of sight, leaving instructions with Cyrus or brief handwritten notes folded neatly into Abigail's book bag. But on that particular afternoon, as Martha prepared to leave, Evelyn appeared at the foot of the staircase. "Miss Green," she said. Her voice was smooth and distant, like a lullaby sung from the far end of a cavern. Martha turned. "Mrs. Bennett." Yes." "Good afternoon." Evelyn's eyes scanned her, not in judgment but with a stillness that felt more like dissection than conversation. "You've been very kind to Abigail," she said. "She rarely responds to strangers." "She's a bright child," Martha replied. "Very imaginative." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Much like her father." It was the first and last time Evelyn spoke of Elijah with even the faintest trace of sentiment. Their conversations were always brief, always polite. Evelyn asked after Abigail's behavior, inquired about what books were being read, then dismissed herself with a nod. She never smiled, she never touched her children. And she never, not once, mentioned Judith or Henry, unless Martha brought them up first. Once Martha asked about Judith's frequent absence from lessons. Evelyn tilted her head. "Judith has a different education," she said. "She learns what she must. But she's still so young, she's older than you think." Martha didn't know what to make of that, but she stopped asking. The longer Martha spent at the estate, the more the atmosphere around Evelyn began to unsettle her. There was something theatrical in her stillness, as if every movement was rehearsed, every gesture calculated. Her hands were always gloved, even indoors. Her perfume smelled like lavender and ashes, and her eyes, pale green and always slightly too wide, never seemed to blink when they should. Servants feared her. Cyrus never called her by name, only ma'am. The cook, a heavy-set woman named Lena, muttered prayers under her breath when Evelyn entered the kitchen. One scullery maid, barely 16, ran off the property in tears after a single encounter. "I knocked by accident," she sobbed to the grocer's wife later that week. "The door opened and she wasn't alone in the mirror." There were 2 of her, and one of them was smiling. People in town spoke of Evelyn the way they spoke of winter storms, distantly, cautiously, never too loudly. Some said she'd been beautiful once, radiant and kind, before marrying Elijah. Others claimed she was never real to begin with, just something he'd summoned and wrapped in skin. Martha dismissed the wilder tales, but couldn't deny the quiet consensus. Evelyn Bennett was unnatural. Still, there were cracks in her composure. Martha once spotted her in the garden at dusk, barefoot in the wet grass, hands trembling as she stared at the soil. No gardening tools, no flowers, just a patch of earth dug into a shallow, misshapen hole. When Evelyn noticed her watching, she straightened and walked away without a word. Another time Abigail whispered, "Mama talks to the birds." Martha smiled. "Lots of people talk to birds." "Not in her voice," the girl replied. Late one evening, while leaving through the foyer, Martha passed by the parlor and glimpsed Evelyn sitting alone at the piano. Her fingers moved across the keys, but no sound came. The lid was closed. She wasn't playing, she was pretending, moving her hands in rhythm, her eyes closed, as if remembering a song no one else could hear. The music room itself told another story. Dust on unused violins, sheet music torn and scattered. And, worst of all, a child's drawing pinned behind the harp. Crude stick figures, one with wild black hair and long arms, drawn looming over a figure labeled Mama. When asked about the family, Reverend Hill once said, "Elijah turned from God. But Evelyn, she looks like she's still listening to something, I just don't know what." Inside the house, Evelyn's presence stretched into the walls. The servants cleaned the same spotless rooms over and over, as if afraid of disturbing whatever silence she wove between the furniture. Judith mimicked her mannerisms. Henry never spoke when Evelyn entered the room, and Abigail, bright, strange Abigail, never called her mother. Only her. Martha couldn't decide if Evelyn was a victim or a warden. But something bound her to that house, some vow or ritual that hollowed her voice and drained the blood from her face. The longer she remained, the more she seemed like a shadow pretending to be a person. One day, while shelving books in the study, Martha found a scrap of paper tucked behind a dictionary. In Evelyn's handwriting, faint and hurried, "It's watching me now. I don't know how long I can pretend." The Bennett children were beautiful in the way old dolls were, perfectly still, unnervingly delicate, and somehow wrong beneath the surface. Judith, at 16, carried herself like someone twice her age. She rarely spoke, preferring long silences and unbroken gazes. When she did talk, it was in sentences so precise they sounded memorized. Her handwriting looked like copperplate etching, and her presence, like her mother's, left a room colder after she passed through it. Henry, 12, was harder to understand. He spoke softly, when he spoke at all, and never looked directly at people. He was often seen in corners, clutching his journal, scribbling furiously in tight, looping script. His fingernails were always dirty. His eyes always shifting. Once Martha asked what he was writing. "Maps," he said. "To where?" Henry blinked. "The places under the skin." She laughed nervously, but he didn't smile. He simply returned to his page, drawing what looked like a corridor made of teeth. Abigail, the youngest, remained the most open, the most childlike, but even she bore that eerie Bennett quietness. She would dance in circles, sing to herself in languages Martha didn't recognize, and stop abruptly mid-motion, as if listening to something far away. She loved games, especially hiding ones. But when Martha found her once curled beneath the staircase, Abigail whispered, "Shh, he doesn't know I'm here." "Who?" Martha asked. Abigail didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the wall. Teachers in the village began to share concerns. The Bennett children attended school irregularly. When they did show up, they remained separate from their classmates, never joining games, never eating lunch, always watching. One boy, Samuel, told his mother that Judith had whispered something into his ear that made him cry for hours. He wouldn't repeat it. When pressed, he only said, "She made me see my bones." Other students reported strange things. Henry drawing pictures of them sleeping, Judith reciting verses that sounded like prayers but ended in curses. Abigail placing small piles of salt and feathers in the corners of the classroom. One teacher resigned without explanation. Another began bringing a Bible to class. At home, things grew no less strange. Martha began to notice patterns. Judith was often near mirrors, watching her reflection more than the room. Henry drew in cycles, first eyes, then teeth, then spirals, over and over. Abigail's imaginary friend, Mr. Crow, became more present in their conversations. "Does Mr. Crow visit often?" Martha asked one afternoon. Abigail nodded. "He lives here." "Where?" "In the spaces," she said, pointing at the corner where the walls met the ceiling. The longer Martha stayed, the more she noticed those spaces, the places where light never settled, where sound bent oddly. Sometimes she'd pass by a door and feel like something on the other side had just stepped away. The children moved through those spaces easily, never startled by the creaks or shifts in temperature. It was their house, their world. She was the outsider. Once she found a bundle under Abigail's bed, twigs wrapped in hair, tied with a strip of Judith's nightgown. When she asked about it, Abigail replied, "It's a gift." "For what's coming?" Henry left notes in Latin tucked inside his books, though no one had ever taught him the language. Judith stopped responding to her name. When Martha called, the girl would turn her head slightly, as if listening through layers of water. When Martha mentioned these things to Evelyn, she was met with indifference. "Children are strange," Evelyn said, "but they grow out of it." "No," Martha said softly, "they're not growing out of it. They're growing into something." But Evelyn had already turned away. Cyrus, the butler, remained silent, but his eyes betrayed his fear. One morning, Martha caught him staring at the children's wing from the stairwell. He held a candle, though it was broad daylight. "I hear them speaking when they sleep," he said, voice low. "Words I cannot remember when I wake." In town, the children became a subject only whispered about. Some claimed Judith had been seen walking barefoot in the cemetery before dawn. Others said Henry talked to animals, and they listened. One farmer swore he saw Abigail standing in his field, arms outstretched, surrounded by crows that didn't fly away when he approached. Martha knew something had taken root in that house, something ancient and unseen, and she knew the children weren't just affected, they were central. One evening, as she packed her satchel, she found a folded note inside. "You shouldn't be here when it begins," it read in a child's shaky scrawl. There was no signature, but she recognized the ink. It was Henry's. The first to leave was Clara. She'd only been at the Bennett estate for 2 weeks, assigned to assist Lena in the kitchen. One morning she failed to show up for breakfast. Her bed was cold, neatly made, her few belongings still in place. No note. No sign of struggle. Cyrus organized a quiet search of the grounds, but Elijah made no report to the authorities. He claimed the girl had stolen from the cellar and fled in shame. She was unstable, he told Martha without emotion. We were generous to offer her shelter. Martha, uneasy but unsure, said nothing, but she began to notice that Clara wasn't the first name whispered among the staff. There had been others, maids, gardeners, delivery boys, whose time at the Bennett estate ended abruptly and without farewell. The pattern grew. One by one, young staff members either fled in silence or were dismissed with cryptic explanations. And those who remained long enough to speak of what they'd seen left changed. One boy, Jacob, no more than 17, staggered into town barefoot and shaking. He'd worked as a stable hand. After 3 weeks on the property, he ran until his legs gave out on the road to Mannheim. A farmer found him curled in a ditch, muttering, "It looks back, it looks back, it looks back." He refused to speak of what it was. His family took him in, but he never worked again. He spent his days rocking on the porch, staring at things no one else could see. Another, a chambermaid named Ruth, confided in the town's seamstress before boarding a train west. She described hearing voices in the walls, soft humming in the attic at midnight, and a figure watching her sleep from the crack beneath the closet door. "It whispered my name," she said, "but not with a mouth." The townspeople grew wary. Young workers stopped accepting positions at the estate. Local clergy began to murmur, but no one acted. Elijah Bennett still held influence. His family was old, respected, feared in the way one fears the cliff's edge, beautiful and silent until you step too close. And then came the diary. It was found by accident. Martha had dropped her glove behind a bookshelf in the upstairs study, and while retrieving it, her hand brushed against a thin leather volume hidden in the shadowed space. It was old, its spine cracked, pages brittle with age. The handwriting was hurried, uneven, terrified. It belonged to a maid named Elsie, who had worked for the Bennetts years before Martha arrived. There was no record of her in town, no mention from Evelyn, no acknowledgement from Cyrus, but her words filled the book in panicked ink. "They tell us not to open the west door. They say the master keeps his studies there, but I've heard things, scraping, scratching, like something trying to get out. I swear on my mother the house breathes when he walks past it. Judith stood outside my room last night. She didn't knock, she didn't speak. She just stared until I turned off the light. When I looked again, she was gone, but I could still hear the clicking of her teeth. There's something in the cellar, something they feed. I saw Lena carrying a sack down the back stairs. Blood was dripping from it. Martha felt her stomach turn. The words weren't the fantasies of a frightened girl. They were the echo of everything she herself had begun to fear. She brought the diary to Cyrus, demanded answers. His face went pale. He refused to touch it. "You shouldn't have found that," he said. "Why? Who was she?" "There are names the house forgets. We're not meant to remember them. But the cellar, there is no cellar," he said quickly, too quickly. That night, Martha waited until the house slept. She crept past the servants' quarters, through the eastern corridor, and found the door described in the diary, a narrow panel hidden behind a tall tapestry of St. Michael. She pressed her hand against the wood. It was warm. Footsteps startled her. She turned to see Henry in the hallway staring at her. "You're not supposed to be there," he said softly. "What's behind the door, Henry?" He blinked. "It's not a door." "Then what is it?" He tilted his head. A mouth. Martha didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the guest room, the diary under her pillow, and listened to the sounds of the house, the creaks, the sighs, the faint rustle of something moving just out of reach. The next morning, another servant was gone. No one spoke her name. The Bennett house had always been quiet, but it was never still. At first, Martha dismissed the sounds as ordinary. Old houses settle, wood contracts in the cold, wind threads through chimneys. But what she began to hear was not the creak of age. It was something else, something deliberate. Footsteps in the attic when no one was above. Faint whispers behind the walls, rising and falling like a chant half remembered. One night she awoke to the sound of tapping, 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The sound didn't come from the door, it came from within the wall. The next morning she questioned Cyrus. He denied hearing anything. "The house is large," he said. "Sounds travel oddly, but it sounded like a message." Cyrus lowered his eyes. "Some messages aren't meant for you." Judith, when asked, simply smiled. "Say it's rude to listen to whispers that aren't yours." Henry had begun sleeping in the library, surrounded by his notebooks and strange diagrams. When Martha asked why he'd moved, he replied, "The walls are thinner there. I like to hear the memories." "What memories?" "The ones that don't belong to us." Abigail, as always, was the most open. "They're practicing," she whispered. "Who?" "The others. There are others in the house." She nodded. "Not always, but when the walls go soft, they come through." "What do they do?" "They sing, and sometimes they scream." Martha's unease turned to dread. She began to explore the house more deliberately, tracing the corridors, counting the windows, measuring distances. But things didn't add up. Rooms shifted slightly. A hallway that should have been 30 feet long felt endless one day, then barely 10 the next. The windows showed landscapes that didn't match. Once she looked out and saw the back garden, except it was nighttime outside, though the clock read noon. One morning she followed a low hum through the west wing. The sound led her to an unused sewing room. Inside, everything was coated in dust, except the chair facing the mirror. The mirror was wrong. Its reflection lagged slightly, like a delayed echo of motion. And in its glass, she didn't see herself, but a younger version. Her hair longer, her eyes more hopeful. Behind that version of herself stood Evelyn, smiling. Martha turned, but the room was empty. Later she confronted Lena, who had served the Bennetts for over a decade. The woman had deep lines under her eyes and hands that trembled when idle. "What do you know about the noises in the walls?" Martha demanded. Lena sighed, her voice hoarse. "When I first came here, I thought it was rats. Then I thought it was madness, but now I think it's the house remembering." "Remembering what?" "All the pieces of people it's taken." That evening, Martha returned to her quarters and locked the door. She sat at her desk, diary open, and began to write. "The walls breathe. The mirrors lie. The house is alive." The next morning she found a page torn from her diary nailed to her door. It read, in handwriting that wasn't hers, "Stop asking." She didn't tell the family. Instead, she went to the village and spoke to Father Rourke, an aging priest with pale hands and a stammer. "I need to know about Elijah Bennett," she said, "and what he studied." The priest hesitated, then stood and opened a drawer. He produced a letter, aged, brittle, unsigned. "He asked me for access to the restricted archives," it read. "He sought the Codex Ignis, claimed it was for historical purposes, but he knew the chance. He spoke the names. I refused him. I told him to burn the copies he had. He only smiled." Martha asked what the Codex was. Father Rourke whispered, "A guide to opening things that should remain shut, doors not in the ground. Names not meant for tongues. Do you think he used it? I think he became part of it." When Martha returned to the estate, she found Abigail waiting in her room. "They're louder now," the girl said. "Who?" Abigail's eyes welled with tears. "The ones behind the walls, they're waking up." Martha knelt beside her. "What do they want?" the girl whispered. "To come back through." Martha held her close, heart pounding. The hum had returned, and beneath it, something else, words layered upon words, 100 voices chanting from the cracks in the walls, all breathing in sync. The next day, Cyrus was gone. His room was empty. His shoes remained by the bed. Abigail's 8th birthday arrived on a cloudless June morning. The sky was an impossible blue, and the trees swayed with the kind of breeze that whispered promises of innocence. It should have been a perfect day. The invitations had gone out weeks in advance, handwritten, pressed into vellum envelopes sealed with black wax. The townsfolk were surprised by the gesture. The Bennetts had never hosted a public celebration before, especially not one involving children. Yet curiosity overcame hesitation. 10 families accepted. Children were dressed in their finest. Mothers whispered warnings and prayers. Fathers lingered near the gates, uncertain. Martha arrived early, having been asked to help oversee the festivities. She found the grounds transformed. Silk banners fluttered in the wind. Tables were adorned with lavender and crystal pitchers, and a small puppet stage had been erected near the west lawn. Yet despite the brightness, something felt off. There was no music, no laughter, just a stillness beneath it all, like a held breath. Judith stood beneath a tree in a dark dress that did not suit the season. Henry paced along the hedge, muttering to himself, and Evelyn watched from an upstairs window, unmoving, as if carved from ice. Abigail, however, beamed. She wore a crown of thorns painted gold and clutched a small black box wrapped in a velvet ribbon. "Is that your gift?" Martha asked gently. Abigail shook her head. "It's for the last game." "What game is that?" "You'll see," she said, and skipped away. As the guests arrived, the children played cautiously. They gathered around the puppet stage, ate sugared pears, and chased hoops across the lawn. But Judith watched them the way a hawk watches mice. She stood still, whispering words to herself as her fingers traced invisible shapes on her skirt. One child, Peter Langston, wandered too close to the west wing. Judith appeared beside him without sound. "You shouldn't go there," she said. Peter shrugged. "Why?" She leaned in and whispered something into his ear. He screamed. He screamed with such raw terror that his mother came running, scooping him up as he thrashed and cried. He didn't speak another word that day. And later, when questioned at home, he refused to repeat what she'd said. "She showed me," he whispered. "She showed me what she is." The party continued, though unease spread like smoke. Parents huddled near the servants. Children clung to legs and refused to eat the cake Evelyn had prepared. Martha tried to speak to Elijah, but he was absent. Not just physically. His presence felt erased. As the sun dipped, Abigail called everyone to gather. "It's time for my gift," she announced, holding up the black box. Judith joined her, standing silently, eyes glazed. Henry sat cross-legged nearby, drawing spirals into the dirt with a bone. Abigail opened the box. Inside was a doll, handmade, its face painted in dark ink, its mouth sewn shut. She held it up and began to chant. The words were unfamiliar, a strange cadence that did not belong to any known tongue. At first, the guests thought it a child's game, but the sound twisted, became layered, deep. Voices echoed hers, though no one else moved their lips. The air grew heavy. Children began to cry. Mothers pulled them away, but their feet felt heavy, the ground sticky. Judith stepped forward, lifted her hands and spoke in unison with Abigail. Her voice doubled, warped, older than it should be. The wind stopped. The candles along the tables flared, then extinguished. Then silence. One child, Margaret Dunn, began to scream uncontrollably. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into her mother's arms, her mouth open in a silent wail. She wouldn't speak again for 3 years. Another boy vomited black bile and ran until he passed out in the orchard. Martha rushed forward, grabbing Abigail by the shoulders. "Stop this! What are you doing?" Abigail blinked. "They told me to." "Who?" But the girl only looked up at the attic window. Martha turned. For the briefest moment, a shape stood behind the glass. Tall, cloaked in darkness, its face a blur of moving mouths. When she turned back, the box was gone. Judith was gone. Parents fled. Some never spoke to the Bennetts again. Others moved away entirely. Elijah never addressed the incident. Evelyn, when questioned, said only, "Children have vivid imaginations." Martha tried to reason, to explain, to seek logic, but there was none. That night, the house was quieter than ever, but the walls hummed, and Martha knew without doubt that something had awakened. It was known among the staff that there was a room in the Bennett house no one was to enter. The west wing was always colder, even in summer. The air felt thick, metallic. Doors that led nowhere, windows that opened onto walls. The hallway curved slightly, just enough to make you feel disoriented, like walking through a memory that wasn't yours. Martha had passed the corridor many times, but only recently had she begun to pay attention. One evening, returning from the library with Henry's forgotten journal in hand, she noticed a door at the end of the west hall that had never been there before. Heavy wood, black iron handle, no keyhole. She reached for it instinctively. It didn't budge. She placed her ear against it. Silence, then faintly, breathing. The next day, she asked Lena about the room. The cook crossed herself and said, "It's not locked, it's asleep." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" Lena shook her head. "It's a warning." Even Cyrus, before his disappearance, had avoided that wing. "There are things inside that remember. Before the house was built," he once muttered. Martha knew she shouldn't press further. But curiosity in the Bennett house wasn't just dangerous, it was inevitable. The opportunity came 3 days later. A delivery boy named Thomas arrived with crates of books. While the staff were occupied, he wandered. Later, shaken and pale, he confessed to Martha what he'd seen. "I heard crying," he said, "from behind the black door. I thought maybe a child was hurt. So I opened it." "You opened the west door?" He nodded. "It wasn't locked, just heavy." "What was inside?" He trembled. I don't know. It was dark. The floor was wrong. It sloped, like a hill, but the walls kept going down. There were markings, red ones, on the ceiling. But there was no ceiling. Just more stairs. He left before dusk and never returned. That night, Martha lit a candle and returned to the hall. The door was there again, silent and waiting. She turned the handle. This time it opened. The air inside was thick, humid, smelling of old leather and rust. The candle flickered violently. She stepped inside. The room was circular, lined with shelves holding unmarked books, jars of dark fluid, bundles of herbs she didn't recognize. The walls pulsed slightly as though breathing. At the center stood a pedestal and on it a mirror. Unlike the others in the house, this mirror didn't reflect her face. It reflected the room behind her, but with small differences. The shelves were empty, the books were gone. In their place stood figures, tall, thin, faceless, unmoving. As she stared, the figures began to move forward in the reflection. But when she turned around, the room was empty. Her breath hitched. Then she saw the stains. On the floor, dried. Deep. Blood. the kind that had been scrubbed 100 times and still refused to leave. She backed away, her candle now little more than a glow. Then came the whisper. "Martha." She froze. The voice came not from the room but from inside her skull, curling around her name like smoke. She ran. The door slammed behind her. For 3 days, she told no one. She tried to convince herself it had been a dream, a hallucination, but the bruises on her hands from slamming the door open said otherwise. The scent of rust clung to her clothes, and her candle, now burned to its base, lay on her writing desk where she was certain she hadn't left it. Judith began watching her more closely. Henry stopped speaking altogether. Evelyn was nowhere to be found. And Abigail? Abigail sat beneath the stairs and whispered lullabies into her doll's ear, over and over. "They said it's almost time," the girl sang. "They said the room is ready." Martha began to understand what the house truly was, not a place but a passage, a wound in the world, wrapped in stone and wood and rituals too old to name. The locked room was not a room, it was a door, and now it was open. Evelyn Bennett vanished on a Wednesday. There was no warning, no note, no sound in the night. She simply wasn't there when the morning came. Her absence was first noticed by Lena, who brought tea to the upstairs parlor and found the curtains drawn, the bed untouched, and the perfume bottle shattered on the floor. Elijah offered no concern. When Martha asked where Evelyn had gone, he responded flatly, "She left." "That's not possible," Martha said. "She wouldn't leave without Abigail." "Without telling someone." He looked at her then, eyes empty. "You do not know what Evelyn would or would not do." The children offered no answers. Judith now wore her mother's pendant, a delicate silver chain with a deep green gem, almost black. It hung against her collarbone like a bruise. She walked with new confidence, sharper, more purposeful. When Martha inquired about Evelyn, Judith smiled faintly and said, "She went where all mothers go, back into the quiet." Henry's drawings had shifted. No more spirals. Now he sketched a tall, pale woman with her mouth stitched shut, arms outstretched in a field of fire. Abigail refused to enter her mother's room. When Martha coaxed her toward it, she dug her heels into the rug and whispered, "She's still in there." "What do you mean?" "She can't scream," the girl said, "but she's still there." Martha pushed open the bedroom door that night. The air inside was frozen. The mirror was cracked. The walls had been stripped of every portrait. Only the vanity remained, its drawers empty, the dust swept into strange circular patterns. On the mirror, someone had written with a fingertip in the condensation, "Not gone, taken." Martha felt herself spiraling. The house no longer shifted subtly. It pulsed. It knew her now. It watched. When she passed the hallways, the lamps flickered. When she closed her door, the latch sometimes undid itself. And Evelyn's absence grew like mold in the corners of each room. Judith began taking charge of the household. Staff reported to her. Even Lena bowed her head when the girl entered the kitchen. She issued instructions in her mother's voice, word for word, and once referred to herself in the third person as we. One afternoon, Martha overheard her speaking alone in the music room, her voice low and in a language that twisted in the air like smoke. Later, Judith approached Martha in the garden. "You should go," she said. "Before the blood moon." "The what?" Judith touched the pendant at her neck. "It's almost here. The door's ready." "What door?" But Judith only smiled. That night the priest returned. Father Rourke appeared at the gate with trembling hands, clutching a satchel of old texts. He had not been seen in public in weeks. "They summoned her," he whispered to Martha when she met him in the drawing room. "Elijah and Evelyn, they thought they could bind it." "Bind what?" He pulled a parchment from his bag. It showed a sigil, a perfect circle with lines like veins branching outward, a single eye at its center. "The lady beneath," he said. "She sleeps in mirrors, walks in reflections. She offers knowledge and takes form through memory." They fed her, with names, with flesh. Evelyn tried to stop him. "But she's gone." "No," he said. "She's absorbed." He trembled violently. "You must leave this place." But Martha didn't. Something tethered her. Abigail's fear, Henry's silence, Judith's transformation, and the growing weight in her own chest that told her leaving now wouldn't matter. Whatever had begun in that house wasn't finished. Later, she found a page tucked into the kitchen pantry, half-burned, written in Evelyn's hand. "I tried to close it. I tried to drown it in blood and salt, but it drinks everything, even light. I think it's in me now. I can feel it folding me into the walls. If you find this, please take Abigail before she becomes like them." The final words were smeared. Martha folded the note and hid it in her coat. The sky that night was cloudless, but the moon had turned red, and the house, ever silent, began to hum again. The house would not sleep. Each night, Martha lay in bed with the blanket pulled to her chin, listening. Breaths behind walls, light footsteps where there were no halls. And now always the low rhythmic hum, steady, pulsing, as if something buried deep beneath the floorboards was exhaling. She no longer questioned if something unnatural lived within the walls. The question had changed. How deep did it go? After Evelyn's disappearance and Father Rourke's warning, Martha's fear gave way to determination. She began searching the house with renewed purpose, not for ghosts but for proof. She started in Evelyn's quarters. At first glance, the room remained pristine. The perfume bottles, the faded chair by the window, the closed vanity drawer. But closer inspection revealed layers. Beneath the floorboard near the bed, she found the first clue, a tiny latch embedded in the wood. With effort, it opened a narrow crawl space. Inside was a small iron box wrapped in linen. Martha carried it to her room and pried it open. Inside were folded letters, brittle and stained. They were all in Evelyn's handwriting, unsigned, unsent, addressed to no one. "I see them in the mirror now, not just reflections, echoes, the children too. Henry's dreams are no longer his. Judith walks in circles, repeating verses I never taught her. Abigail hums the tune I sang when I miscarried. She shouldn't know it. She shouldn't know anything about that night. Elijah says he can control it, that if we feed the thing properly, it will grant us sight, clarity, power. But all I see is hunger. I fear he made a deal. I fear he never stopped." Martha read them again and again, her breath shallow. The hints were no longer metaphorical. Evelyn had tried to resist and failed. The next morning she returned to the library. She knew Elijah kept his private materials behind the lower shelves. Books without titles, tomes bound in rough hide, symbols etched into their corners. While dusting weeks ago, she'd seen the smallest crack in the paneling behind the eastern bookcase. Now, armed with a knife and resolve, she pried it open. Inside, a hidden compartment, and within it, a manuscript. Its cover was black, its pages yellowed with age and inked in crimson. The title page read, "Abridged Fragments of the Codex Ignis." She didn't understand most of it. The language was a mixture of Latin, Greek, and something older, but the diagrams were unmistakable. Human forms drawn open like puzzles, mirrors depicted as gates, rituals involving mirrors, blood, names. And in one section, underlined in shaking pen, "To open the veil is to feed the echo. To call the lady beneath is to surrender the soul's outline." There were notes in the margins written in a different hand, likely Elijah's. One read, "3 vessels, one to reflect, one to speak, one to bind." And another, "Abigail, reflection, Evelyn, binding." Martha's heart pounded. She now understood. Elijah hadn't stopped his experiments. He'd merely moved them from his clinic into the walls of his home. And the children, each had been given a role in whatever ancient mechanism he had constructed. Evelyn had tried to stop it. Her resistance became her sacrifice. Martha rushed to confront Henry, hoping to pull the truth from him. She found him in the garden, sitting among crows. "They listen to me now," he said, without looking up. "They know I've been marked." "Marked by what?" "The thing that sees through the mirrors it taught us." "Henry," she knelt before him, "what is it trying to do?" He looked at her finally. His eyes were too wide, too black. "It doesn't want to come here," he said. Martha froze. It wants to bring us there. That night she packed a satchel. She would take Abigail and leave. She would find help. Bring the law, the church, anyone. But when she reached Abigail's room, the child was already waiting. "I can't go," she said softly. "You must," Martha urged. "We have to escape." "No. It's already open. I just haven't stepped through yet." Martha's hands trembled. "Who told you that?" Abigail smiled. "Mama did. She speaks through the dark glass now. And she says I'll understand soon." Martha backed away. She felt it then, something subtle but final. The house had closed around them, and the mirror in the hall was no longer showing her reflection. The moon rose red. Martha watched it from the guest room window, her breath clouding the glass despite the summer heat. It didn't glow. It throbbed. A heavy, pulsing light that painted the world in blood. Below, the Bennett estate had changed. The trees leaned in. The grass looked brittle, scorched. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Inside the house, everything was too quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no wind. The time had come. Martha moved through the hallways with a knife hidden beneath her coat and the iron box of Evelyn's letters pressed to her chest. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She passed the parlor, shuttered, the study, cold, the dining hall, emptied of furniture. In the grand hall she found the mirrors uncovered, dozens of them, some she had never seen before, as if pulled from hidden walls. Each showed a different version of the house, twisted, burned, overgrown. Some showed her, others showed no one, and in one she saw Evelyn. The woman's face was pale, lips sealed shut with black thread. Her eyes begged. Martha looked away. From the east corridor the chanting began, low at first, then rising, a language she didn't know but now understood. They were calling. She moved toward the sound. The west wing was lit now, each wall glowing faintly. The locked door stood open. Beyond it, a spiral staircase descending into darkness. She took a step, then another. Each stair groaned. The walls pulsed like lungs. She reached the bottom. The chamber was circular, just as Thomas had described. Shelves lined with empty jars, chalk symbols on the stone. And at its center, Elijah. He stood before a massive mirror, identical to the one from the hidden room. Behind him, Judith knelt, drawing runes in a pool of what Martha prayed wasn't blood. Henry rocked beside her, whispering numbers, and Abigail stood before the glass, barefoot, silent. Elijah didn't turn. "You should not be here," he said. "You're hurting them," Martha replied. "No. I'm setting them free. What is this?" He turned now. His face had changed, longer, thinner, drained of color. His eyes glowed faintly with something not human. "It is a return," he said. "The lady beneath grants release, memory, transcendence. They're just children. They are vessels, and I am the key." Judith rose. Her eyes were blank. Her mouth moved with the chant. Henry joined her. Abigail remained still. Martha stepped forward. "Abigail, look at me. You don't have to do this." The girl's head tilted. "But I already did." Elijah raised his hands. The mirror shimmered, not with reflection, but with movement. On the other side, a dark shape stirred. A figure, tall, thin, wrapped in shadow, its face a shifting mass of mouths. Judith extended her arms. The figure mimicked her. Henry began to scream, not in fear but in ecstasy. Elijah chanted louder. Martha reached into her coat, pulled the knife. "You won't take them." Elijah laughed, a hollow, grating sound. "You're too late." The mirror rippled. A hand reached through, long, jointless, black as ink. Abigail stepped forward. Martha ran. She tackled the girl, pulling her away from the glass. Judith shrieked. The hand grazed the floor, leaving burn marks. Elijah raised his voice. "She is ready." Martha grabbed a nearby jar and threw it at the pedestal. It shattered. The candles flickered. Judith stumbled. The mirror flickered. Martha shoved Abigail behind her. The figure screamed, not with sound but vibration. The walls cracked. Martha turned to Elijah. She chose not to enter. His expression twisted. Then another must take her place. He stepped toward the mirror. It reached for him and welcomed him. His body dissolved, not burned, not broken, erased, gone. The mirror shuddered, cracked. The figure behind it howled. And then, silence. Judith collapsed. Henry fainted. Martha held Abigail tight. The mirror dimmed, then shattered. The mirror was in pieces. Shards glimmered across the stone floor, each one reflecting a different version of the room. In one fragment, Elijah still stood. In another, Martha was absent. One showed Judith burning. Another showed Abigail alone, her face stretched in grief. None of them matched reality. The chamber was silent now, but the silence was wrong. It wasn't calm, it was waiting. Judith stirred, coughing. Her skin was pale, drained. The green pendant around her neck pulsed faintly, as if still alive. Henry groaned and sat up, blinking rapidly, confused. He looked around like a boy waking from a fever dream. Martha remained crouched, shielding Abigail, who clung to her with shaking arms. The air grew hotter. From the cracks in the mirror's pedestal, smoke began to rise, thin dark tendrils that curled through the room like searching fingers. The ritual had been broken, but not undone. The gate had closed, but the path was open. A low moan echoed through the walls. Judith screamed, not from pain, but from realization. "She's still here," she sobbed. "She's in the house." Martha rose, grabbing Abigail's hand. "We have to leave now." Henry stumbled behind them as they fled up the spiral staircase. The house above was darker than before, the air thick with ash. The chandeliers swayed, though there was no wind. The walls bled water. The mirrors all cracked in unison as they passed, releasing faint whispering echoes. In the foyer, Lena appeared, her apron soaked in soot, eyes wide with terror. "What did you do?" she asked. "Elijah's gone," Martha replied. "It's over." "No," Lena said. "You don't understand. If she's been called, there is no over." A roar came from the west wing, a sound like 100 voices being torn in opposite directions. Lena turned and fled. Martha pulled the children through the main corridor. Flames bloomed behind them, not natural fire, but something darker. Black, cold, and hungry. It devoured light as it spread. Paintings peeled, wood splintered. They burst into the garden, gasping. The sky had turned crimson. The moon loomed enormous, like an eye half-lidded in contempt. Behind them the house shook. Then the windows began to shatter, one by one. Each release brought a howl. Judith clutched her head. "She's angry." "We need to get to the chapel," Martha said. "It's consecrated ground." But Abigail stopped. "She's not angry at us." "Then who?" "She's angry he left." Martha turned back toward the house and saw her. In the second-story window, through the fire and smoke, Evelyn stood. Or something wearing her face. Her lips moved, soundless. And then the house exploded inward. Not an outward blast, but a collapse, like the structure had been hollowed from the inside and folded into itself. Rooms vanished. The roof crumbled. Stone turned to dust. Mirrors detonated in waves. Martha threw herself over the children. When she looked up, the house was gone. In its place, a crater. Smoldering. Silent. The Bennett estate had ceased to exist, not burned, not ruined, erased. The ground was scorched, blackened. At the center lay one thing, the pendant Judith had worn, its gem now cracked, leaking slow, shimmering tears into the dirt. Judith wept beside it. Henry stared at the sky. Abigail stood, and for the first time in weeks, her face was calm. "She's gone now," she whispered. Martha nodded. "Will she come back?" the girl asked. Martha didn't answer. She took their hands, turned away from the ruin, and led them toward the road. The echoes had stopped, but deep in the earth beneath their feet, something still stirred, not in rage, not in hunger, but in memory. Morning came slowly. Martha sat on the edge of the crater, her dress torn, her arms wrapped tightly around Abigail. Judith had fallen asleep nearby, curled beside a half-burned tree. Henry sat with his knees drawn to his chest, staring into the ash. No one spoke. The house was truly gone, not just burned to the ground, gone. No foundation, no rubble, no bones. The land where it once stood was a scorched depression in the earth, smooth and glassy in some places, cracked in others. Nothing natural could explain what had happened. Nothing human. By noon, the sheriff arrived with 2 deputies and the town doctor. They came in silence, led by the trail of smoke. When they reached the site, they stopped, stunned by the sight. What happened here? The sheriff asked. Martha rose, shaky but calm. It collapsed. Inward, he asked. She nodded. He stepped to the edge of the pit. Where's Elijah? Gone. Judith? She's here, alive. Anyone else? No. The sheriff said nothing more. He didn't ask about the unnatural temperature of the soil. He didn't comment on the way the wind refused to cross the crater. He simply removed his hat and whispered a prayer. The children were taken to the church. Father Rourke received them without question. He never asked what they'd seen. He never asked why they didn't cry. That night, the town held a meeting. Rumors swirled. Lightning strike, gas explosion, secret passage collapse. But no theory settled. The silence that followed was its own agreement. No one would speak of the Bennett estate again. In the following weeks, Judith faded into herself. Her once proud posture slumped. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. She no longer touched the pendant, now locked in a drawer at the parish. Henry resumed drawing, but his pages were empty shapes now. Circles, trees, birds. Sometimes nothing at all. Abigail clung to Martha. She followed her room to room, never straying far. She slept in her bed. She stopped singing. Martha stayed in the village, refusing the offers to move to the city. She took a position as a school assistant and quietly rebuilt her life. She visited the crater once, just once, and never returned. The soil was warm under her feet, too warm, and the trees at its edge leaned away. One morning, Father Rourke handed her an envelope. I found this under the altar, he said. I believe it's yours. Inside was a single page, Evelyn's handwriting. If she returns, it won't be through mirrors. It will be through memory, through us. Burn what's left. Martha did. That night, she placed the box of Evelyn's letters, the broken pieces of the pendant, and the last drawing Henry made, all within a deep fire pit behind the rectory. She poured lamp oil, lit a match, and watched the flames rise. For hours they burned. But the next morning, in Abigail's dresser drawer, lay a single object, a mirror shard, still warm. The town never officially acknowledged what had happened. No articles were printed, no inquests were held, no sermons mentioned the name Bennett again. The crater was left unmarked, a wound in the landscape that no one dared approach. The land grew wild around it, black weeds, gnarled trees, thorny vines that moved like veins across the edge of the property. Children were warned away. Livestock refused to graze nearby, and yet no one fenced it off, as if admitting it existed might awaken it again. In time, newcomers arrived, drawn by farmland and quiet roads. They asked about the strange clearing west of town. The locals only shrugged. Old quarry, they'd say. Unsafe ground. But some remembered. The grocer's wife still left salt by her doors. The librarian refused to keep mirrors near her desk, and Father Rourke, who rarely left the chapel, began to seal its windows with symbols etched in candle smoke. No one questioned him. Even the children grew cautious. Games of tag avoided the eastern fields. Schoolbooks containing stories of reflection or ancient rites were quietly removed. And no one, under any circumstance, was allowed to mention the name Abigail aloud unless they meant the baker's cat. Martha carried the silence heavier than most. She kept to herself, working quietly at the schoolhouse, raising Abigail in a modest home at the edge of the village. Judith remained with the sisters at the convent, withdrawn and passive, speaking only when addressed. Henry was sent to a private academy in another state, under a false surname and strict observation. He painted now, abstract patterns mostly, all in shades of black. Only Abigail stayed close. She grew quieter with each passing season. She laughed less, slept more. Sometimes she stood at the window for hours, unmoving. Martha would find sketches in her notebooks, tall shadowy women, hands pressed to glass, faces missing. "Who are they?" she asked once. Abigail responded without turning. "She doesn't need a name anymore." Martha didn't press. Instead, she prayed. The fragment of mirror she'd found, the one that had reappeared after the burning, was buried deep behind the chapel, sealed in a jar of holy water and salt. Yet sometimes, late at night, Martha dreamed of its surface. She saw Evelyn inside, reaching, mouth open in a silent scream. She never told Abigail. One morning, Abigail asked to return to the old orchard. It bordered the land where the estate had once stood. Martha hesitated, then agreed, hoping familiarity might restore something in her. They walked together, hand in hand. The trees were thinner now. Many had died. Others twisted unnaturally, leaning toward the empty field like mourners over a grave. As they neared the edge of the crater, Martha's breath caught. The soil had cracked open again. Just a little. A line across the earth no wider than a finger, but fresh. Abigail stared at it. Martha pulled her back. "It's not your place," she whispered. Abigail nodded slowly. "Not yet." They turned and left. That night, Martha boarded up the house's mirrors, even the smallest ones. She replaced every reflective surface with fabric or wood. When she bathed Abigail, she filled the tub only halfway, so the water never stilled enough to reflect. It was not fear, it was precaution, because she knew now the truth. The silence in the town was not peace. It was a pact, an agreement made without words. Forget, look away, survive. The others had chosen to pretend, but Martha remembered everything. 20 years passed. The town changed. New roads were paved, farms expanded, children born into a world that no longer remembered the Bennetts. The crater was covered by brush and time, its edges softened, its history erased from every map. A nature trail was proposed once, but the project never moved forward. The ground refused to hold any new structure. No one said why. Martha aged quietly. She walked with a cane now, her back bent, her voice soft. She lived in a cottage shaded by sycamores, its windows narrow, its mirrors covered still. Abigail was 28. She worked at the small bookstore, rarely spoke, and never married. She kept to herself but was polite, gentle with children, kind to animals. No one ever suspected she had once stood at the edge of the world. Until the next blood moon. It rose one summer evening just as it had before, huge and red, a swollen eye watching from the sky. Farmers paused in their fields. Old women whispered prayers. Something shifted in the air, and in the woods beyond the orchard, a boy disappeared. His name was Daniel Cole. He was 11, curious. He liked riddles, rocks, and making up stories about ghosts in the trees. On that evening, he followed a path behind his home, chasing a deer into the overgrowth. He never returned. A search party combed the woods for 2 days. They found no body, no blood, only his flashlight, sitting upright, still warm, and beside it, a mirror shard. When Martha heard the news, she did not speak. She walked to her cellar and unlocked the chest beneath the floor. Inside was the last thing she had hoped never to see again, the shard Abigail had left behind years ago. It pulsed softly. Later that night, Martha knocked on Abigail's door. The younger woman opened it, eyes hollow. "You felt it too," she said. Martha nodded. "Is it you?" Abigail shook her head. "No, but it's awake again." They sat in silence. Neither asked what to do. They already knew there was nothing that could be done. The lady beneath had not come back. She had never left. She simply waited, quietly, patiently, inside the memory of a house that no longer stood. And now she had chosen another. Perhaps Daniel, perhaps someone else, perhaps many. Martha left Abigail's home just before dawn. The moon was fading, but the sky still held that strange, bruised glow. She looked toward the forest, toward the place they all tried to forget. She whispered only once, "I remember." And in that moment, the wind stilled. The leaves stopped, and something behind her reflection smiled. If you were captivated by the chilling secrets of the Bennett family, subscribe now to uncover more tales of forgotten darkness, twisted history, and the horrors that time tries to bury. And if you dare to keep going, click on the video on your screen now to discover what really happened behind the locked doors of Holloway Asylum. Some stories don't end, they echo,